Tonight at 10, Donald Trump seeks to reassure Americans that they have nothing to fear from his presidency. In his first TV interview since being elected, he was asked about reports of racial harassment since his victory.
Say stop it if it helps. I will say this, and I'll say it right to the camera, stop it.
First Brexit, now Trump. Changes in the air, says the Prime Minister, as she calls on British business to shape a new era that works for all. We'll be looking at the emerging international implications of a Trump presidency, also tonight. The trial of the man accused of murdering MP Jo Cox is told he shouted, "This is for Britain," as he launched a gun and knife attack on her. Dementia overtakes heart disease and becomes the leading cause of death in England and Wales for the first time. Heroin made in Mexico. We have a special report on the surge in production to meet demand over the border in America. And the fastest man out of the blocks, but what will he do now that he's thinking of slowing down?
And here in the south, 4 months after his release, why the legal battle won't go away for this retired fireman in Dorset. And 2 arrests are made by police into abuse allegations against the late Prime Minister, Sir Edward Heath.
Good evening. The president-elect, Donald Trump, has told Americans they have no reason to fear his presidency. In a wide-ranging interview for the CBS network in America, he's been talking about his plans, including the deportation of up to 3 million illegal immigrants. Mr. Trump also called on his supporters who've been accused of racial harassment to stop. But there's been fresh controversy after a media executive accused by opponents of being a supporter of white supremacists was appointed to a senior White House role. Our North America editor John Sopel has the latest.
The United States of America has felt anything but united since the election of Donald Trump. Offensive segregation-era messages have cropped up on Hispanic churches, in schools, on public buildings. This church in Maryland had been daubed with the slogan, "Trump Nation, whites only." It's been painted over, but the stain remains.
This message of hate, we denounce and we don't believe in it. We want this to be truly a home for all of God's people, even the perpetrators of the graffiti.
I've done a lot of big things. I've never done anything like this.
In his interview on 60 Minutes, Donald Trump denounced those behind these attacks.
I'm very surprised to hear that. I hate to hear that.
Do you want to say anything to those people?
I would say don't do it. That's terrible, because I'm going to bring this country together.
They're harassing Latinos, Muslims.
I am so saddened to hear that, and I say stop it if it helps. I will say this, and I'll say it right to the camera, stop it.
But what about a special prosecutor to put Hillary Clinton in jail, as Donald Trump repeatedly demanded during the campaign? Here, there was equivocation.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to think about it. I feel that I want to focus on jobs.
You called her crooked Hillary, said you wanted to get in jail. Your people in your audiences kept saying lock him up.
Yeah. She
do you want to
did
put
some bad things. I mean, she
I
did
know,
some
but
bad
a
things.
special prosecutor?
I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to hurt them. They're good people.
There have been 2 key appointments so far to Donald Trump's White House team. He's picked Reince Priebus as Chief of Staff, the gatekeeper to the president. A consummate insider from the senior Republican establishment, he's not much liked by grassroots conservatives. Much more controversial is the appointment of Steve Bannon as chief strategist, a man who'll have the president's ear and all the power that goes with that. A former banker who now runs a right-wing website, he's a conservative outsider who critics view as racist and anti-Semitic. Civil rights groups fear it puts a white nationalist footsteps from the Oval Office, a charge Mr. Priebus has been trying to fend off.
That's not the Steve Bannon that I know. I have sat with him for months. I have never, ever, one time experienced that. And
well, they're looking at the Breitbart
website.
People are
taking it way too far. What I would say, okay, look, what I would say is you have to look at the person. I think you have to get to know the person, and I think if people understood that we have a a naval officer, a Harvard Business School, London School of Economics. This is a very, very smart person.
Washington is getting ready to greet America's new president. This will be the grandstand opposite the White House on Inauguration Day. But Donald Trump still has some big choices to make about who he puts in his cabinet. Does he go for outsiders who don't know how Washington works, or the insiders that he said he would have nothing to do with? On that basis, we'll get a pretty clear idea of what sort of president Donald Trump will be. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
Here, the Prime Minister says Donald Trump's victory following the Brexit vote signals that change is in the air. Speaking at the Lord Mayor's banquet in London, Theresa May criticised politicians for not listening to the people and called for a new form of globalisation that works for all. Our political editor Laura Kuenssberg is at the Guildhall this evening. Laura.
Well, Sophie, with the establishment on both sides of the Atlantic now reeling from Donald Trump's victory and still from our decision to quit the EU, Theresa May has basically criticised the whole political class for failing to listen and warning them unless they taking more seriously the concerns of what she describes as ordinary voters, they might lose again. She's given the Liberal consensus, as she describes it, short shrift tonight. But of course, it's easy for any politician to say that change is in the air. Far harder to give clear answers on what that might mean for all of us. Rolls-Royces still purr. Plumed hats are still worn. The champagne still flows and the band plays on. But arriving tonight, the Prime Minister is pitching herself as part of a change, with an unpredictable opposite number across the Atlantic. Who knows what's next?
Praise silence for the Prime Minister.
A year ago, few of us would have predicted the events ahead. A clear, determined decision to leave the European Union, and of course, a new president-elect in the United States who defied the polls and the pundits all the way up to election day itself. Change is in the air.
After the vote for Trump and our vote to quit the EU, her warning to the Western political class: you lost because you didn't listen.
When you fail to see that the Liberal consensus that has held sway for decades has failed to maintain the consent of many people, you're not the champion of liberalism, but the enemy of it.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Not remotely a replica of these two, but an echo of some of the arguments that millions have been left behind.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
By the Liberal political consensus and the worst excesses of big business. And is this the product? Nigel Farage's house call to Trump Tower. An actual snapshot of what has changed. But how should Britain operate when there's distaste as well as delight?
Well, I think there's a lot to be positive about, and it's very important not to prejudge the president-elect or his administration. It's only a few days since the election has taken place. I think we all need to wait and see what they come up with, but I think we should regard it as a moment of opportunity.
Labour's warned Theresa May against sanctioning Donald Trump's rhetoric. Tonight's glittering event looks the same, but the situation's deeply unorthodox. But traditional diplomacy could still have a role.
This is a very important moment when Trump clearly is showing very clear signs. He wants to be a constructive president, he wants to be a responsible president, and therefore he needs close advisors and friends to help him move in the right direction.
Not all of Theresa May's arguments were new tonight, and she answered few of the questions she posed. But with politics in flux, the Prime Minister wants you to believe she's much more than just the old guard. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC News.
Well, let's go back to Washington now and speak to our North America editor, John Sopel, who's at the White House. So Donald Trump has been trying to reassure America about his presidency. Tonight, President Obama seems to have been trying to reassure the world about what's to come.
Yeah, Sophie, the president is on his final trip to Europe tonight. He's about to take off from the White House to Germany and to Greece. But before that, he gave a news conference where he said there would be no weakening of the resolve of America in its relations with the NATO countries. And he said that in the wake of his conversation with Donald Trump last week. He also said that Donald Trump had expressed a great interest in maintaining our core strategic partnerships. So those are the words of reassurance. Interestingly, Donald Trump has also had a conversation today with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, and apparently the president-elect said he's very much looking forward to having a strong and enduring relationship with Russia over the coming months and years. What's more interesting is the readout from the Kremlin on that conversation. The Kremlin said that both Putin and Trump agreed that the US-Russian ties are in an extremely unsatisfactory condition now. Here's the rub. The reason that Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin enjoy terrible relations is not because they don't like each other, although they probably don't. It's because they fundamentally disagree on Ukraine, on Russia's stance towards Syria, on the threatening noises towards the Baltic states. It's policy that divides them. What we don't know is whether Donald Trump is about to change that.
John Sopel, thank you. The trial has begun of the man accused of murdering the Labour MP Jo Cox in her constituency in June, just a week before the EU referendum. The Old Bailey was told that Thomas Mair killed the 41-year-old mother of two for political or ideological reasons. The court heard that the 53-year-old shouted, "This is for Britain," as he launched a gun and knife attack on the MP. Thomas Mair denies the charges. Daniela Ralph reports.
Jo Cox's family, her dad on the right with her mum and her sister, at court to hear how and why she died, and for the first time come face to face with the man accused of killing her. Jo Cox died on the 16th of June, in the midst of the EU referendum campaign. The jury was told her death was shocking and brutal. The MP for Batley and Spen was attacked as she arrived for a constituency surgery at Birstall Library in West Yorkshire. The court heard she was repeatedly stabbed with this dagger-like knife. She was also shot 3 times with this gun. Jo Cox's parents held hands in court as they heard of the desperate attempts to save their daughter's life. One of the MP's colleagues tended her and pleaded with her to think of her children as she tried to keep her alive. But Jo Cox's injuries were just too severe. And this is the man accused of murdering her, Thomas Mair. Eyewitnesses claim he said, "Britain first, and this is for Britain," as he attacked Jo Cox. In court, Thomas Mair was impassive, as the prosecution described a premeditated murder driven by his political or ideological views. The day before Jo Cox died, the prosecution claimed he'd used a computer at Birstall Library. His online searches included the Ku Klux Klan, Nazi material, Ian Gow, the last MP to be murdered, and William Hague, another Yorkshire politician who was a Remain campaigner. When Thomas Mair was arrested, he said to police, "It's me, and I'm a political activist." The trial is expected to last up to 3 weeks. Daniela Ralph, BBC News, the Old Bailey.
For the first time, dementia has overtaken heart disease as the leading cause of death in England and Wales. The number of people dying from the condition has more than doubled in the last 5 years. Our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh looks at the reasons for this rise in dementia-related deaths and its impact on the health service.
The brain controls our memory and all our key functions. Those abilities are gradually destroyed by dementia. The brain on the left has been ravaged by Alzheimer's. It can affect the ability to walk or eat and make patients vulnerable to infections like pneumonia and to blood clots, which can both prove fatal. Vivian Hill's mother Mary was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease at just 61. Although she eventually died of an infection, the underlying cause written on her death certificate was dementia.
She was bedridden, incontinent, couldn't do a thing for herself. And it was heartbreaking to see her like that, feeling so helpless because there was nothing we could do to help her. That for me was the hardest part. She didn't recognise me. She couldn't say my name, and I can't remember to this day when she last said, "I love you." It was absolutely heartbreaking for all of me and my family.
For decades, the biggest killer by far was coronary heart disease. But for men and women combined, dementia is now the leading cause of death. Of just over 500,000 deaths in England and Wales in 2015, almost 1 in 9 was from dementia, including the commonest form, Alzheimer's disease. There were twice as many deaths from dementia among women than men, 41,000 against 20,000. Doctors are better now at diagnosing dementia, but the main reason why it's now the biggest single killer is because we are living longer. The number of people with dementia is expected to double in the next 30 years. Health and social care costs are likely to treble to over £50 billion a year. Charities say it must be given greater priority.
The majority of care that people with dementia receive is social care, and whilst there's large cuts to local authority budgets, people with dementia are either going without care or having to fund care themselves, or receiving care that can be a really, really low quality. So it's essential that this is taken seriously and dementia is really kept firmly on the agenda.
And what is desperately needed is a drug which would halt or slow the onset of dementia. Research spending is rising, but still dwarfed by funding for cancer and heart disease. For many, today's figures represent a wake-up call for a condition for which there is no cure and which is wreaking devastation on more and more families. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Now, one of the recurrent themes of Donald Trump's presidential campaign was his promise to build a wall along the border with Mexico, both to keep illegal immigrants out and to stop drugs from coming into the United States. Heroin production in Mexico has risen dramatically in recent years, going up by 67% in 2014 alone, and almost all of it is being sent across the border. In the same year in America, more than 10,500 people died from heroin overdoses. Our international correspondent Ian Pannell has been to Mexico to investigate the surge in production of heroin. You may find some of the scenes in his report difficult to watch.
From dusk till dawn, Juarez is the gateway to an epidemic gripping America. There are few places in Mexico quite so notorious. Famous for drug trafficking worth billions and the cartels that fight to control this trade. Every day, mothers, fathers, grandparents, even children are being sent across this border smuggling drugs. All in search of customers, cash, and a better life. The drug bosses who recruit and send mules across this border are dangerous men who live in the shadows. But one of them agreed to meet us. We've hidden his identity to allow him to speak out.
How big is the demand for heroin in the United States?
La demanda de heroína ahorita? Heroin demand right now? We don't have enough for it. We need more because the demand is so high. And they're the best customers. We earn 3 or 4 more times than we did before.
I'm wondering, how easy is it for you to get your men across this border?
It is as easy as buying a drink at the store. People here will kill for money. I've sent 80-year-olds with walking sticks across. Even children with a kilo of heroin hidden in their genitalia.
From such beauty comes a beast. From poppy to opium, then heroin. The war on drugs is 45 years old this year. An anniversary with no reason to cheer. This war began because of heroin addiction in America. Half a century of blood and money, and there are more drugs and more victims than ever. Today, the one in greatest demand, the one with the most loyal following, the one most likely to kill its customers, is the drug some call the devil: heroin. And this is where it's being made, deep in the hills of Sinaloa. An area ruled not by politicians or police, but the cartels.
We wanted to meet the men feeding America's addiction, to see how much they're making and why.
As you can see, we're in the middle of the jungle. We're in Mexico, in Sinaloa province. Sinaloa cartel is one of the many drug cartels in Mexico, arguably the most powerful, that ships heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana, other drugs across to the United States. This is a very remote location. It's taken us probably an hour or two to get here. It's far away from prying eyes, and over here in the clearing are two men who are making heroin.
Farmers who used to grow marijuana are switching to poppy because there's more money in it. When the raw opium's ready, it's sent here, to the men who turn it into heroin for the Sinaloa cartel. They call him the cook.
How much heroin will this produce?
About half a kilo of white heroin.
How great is the demand right now? And how has it changed?
We are making more now because we are being asked for more. We used to only make like 3 kilos. Now we're making more like 10 kilos weekly.
What would you say to people in America who said what you do here is responsible for the deaths and the addiction of so many Americans? How would you reply to that?
I know this is bad. We do it in order to earn money. And yes, it's a shame to do so because a lot of people die from shooting up. But this is never going to end.
Whatever the rights and wrongs, what you're watching is driven by simple economics. 1 kilogram of heroin costs £1,600 here. In New York, it's worth more than $40,000. And as it moves through Mexico and across the border, it leaves a trail of addiction and death in its wake. We were taken to a dealer's house in the slums of Juarez, where addicts linger in an endless cycle of despair. Meet Gregorio and Juan, two friends united in addiction, lost to heroin. It costs them just £2 to get their fix. It's enough to get you high, and it's enough to kill you. As Juan shot up, his friend Gregorio started to overdose. There are no ambulances here, no emergency rescue. So Juan tries to revive him, to try to keep Gregorio's blood pumping, to try to bring him back. We thought he'd passed away, but after 15 long minutes, Gregorio came back from the dead. The dealer who'd just sold him the heroin said we should go.
We've been told that we have to leave this area. Obviously people come here for drugs, but it's also a very dangerous part of the city, so we have to go.
The next day we found Gregorio back on the streets, looking for money for his next high. A foot soldier in the army of the walking dead. How long before he's buried beneath the ground he now walks upon? This is the power of heroin. It seeps along the street, over the hills and across the border, recruiting as it goes. Heroin is now on a slow death march across America. Ian Pannell, BBC News, Juarez, Mexico.
That report from Ian Pannell and cameraman Darren Conway. And tomorrow we will be looking at what is driving the surge in demand in America. A brief look now at some of the day's other news stories. And 2016 is on course to be the hottest year on record, according to the World Meteorological Organization. Preliminary data shows that temperatures from January to September were 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. They believe CO2 emissions are the most significant factor behind the rise. New Zealand has been hit by a second earthquake in 2 days. It had a magnitude of 6.2, with the epicentre just north of Christchurch on the South Island. The government is sending aid to areas that have been cut off. Aftershocks are continuing to cause problems. The Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, has signed an order for the extradition of Laurie Love, a British man with Asperger's syndrome. He's accused of hacking into computers belonging to the FBI, the US Central Bank and America's Missile Defense Agency. He faces trial in 3 US states. A man who strangled an off-duty police officer before trying to dissolve his body in an acid-filled bath has been found guilty of murder. Stefano Brizzi from South London killed Gordon Semple after they met through a dating app in April. He will be sentenced at the Old Bailey next month. We will build more houses and make more of them affordable. That's what successive governments have pledged to do. So how much progress is actually being made? Ministers have set themselves the target of 1 million new homes by 2020. But one of Britain's biggest house builders has told the BBC that target will be missed unless there are radical changes in planning and property taxes. In the first of a new series on Britain's housing problems, our economics editor Kamal Ahmed has this special report.
The Ferrier estate in southeast London, leaking, grim and not a place many people wanted to live. Today that estate has gone to be replaced by welcome new homes and a new name, Kidbrooke. Good news, yes, but this modest development has taken an age to build and reveals the enormous planning challenges at the heart of Britain's housing crisis.
Local authorities on there when they grant planning permission.
Rob Perrins leads the company developing the site. He says the government will not hit the target of building 1 million homes by 2020.
There's not enough land ready for development. Secondly, the UK has the highest property taxes in the world. It acts as a disincentive for us to build and for people to move. And thirdly, in my view, it's not a top 3 political issue. And for those under 30, it's the top issue they will face.
The Kidbrooke estate in southeast London, more than 4,500 new homes. Now that may not sound like very many, but this development won't be finished until 2030. That's more than 30 years after plans for this new development were first put on the table. And that really is Britain's housing problem in a nutshell. Yes, you can get planning permission, but that permission comes with conditions. Some 800 conditions for this development alone, from backing new local services to the type of tiles on the roof. Important, but all time-consuming. This is not a problem unique to the southeast. Building affordable homes is a slow process across Britain.
It is a complex picture. The industry is also dealing with rising construction costs, real shortage of skilled labour. And you've got to remember, back in the early 1970s, when we were building 300,000 homes a year, half of those were delivered by local authorities. That just doesn't happen anymore.
The figures bear out the problem at the heart of the UK's housing crisis. In 1968, 222,000 houses were built by private developers, more than this year. But alongside those, 191,000 public council houses were also built. By 2015, the number of private houses had fallen to 128,000. But look at that public housing figure, down to under 37,000. Here's the minister in charge. He told me that 1 million target would be hit and reform was on the way.
In some parts of the country, we're not releasing enough land into the system. Then often people get planning permission, but it takes too long to turn that into a home. Can't live in a planning permission. So we're too slow to get spades in the ground once we've got planning permission.
The government is trying to construct new solutions, from more local authority homes to possible fines if house builders don't pick up the pace, and an admission. The government will have to raise its game to hit that 1 million target. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
Usain Bolt achieved sporting immortality at the Rio Olympics, winning his 9th gold medal to complete a unique triple-triple. Now the world's fastest man is contemplating life beyond the track and is even considering turning to football. With a new film being released about his life, our sports correspondent Katie Gornall's been to Jamaica to meet him.
Here in Jamaica, running fast can make you a national icon.
We love Usain Bolt. You love him. We love him. We love him.
But Usain Bolt is more than that. He's a phenomenon. When he wins, the world celebrates. Now, with his time on the track coming to an end, he wants to reflect.
Just give us an insight. What is it like to be Usain Bolt?
Awesomeness. Competing against the best, pushing myself,
having that fear sometimes, that nervousness, that could I lose? I will miss that, but you have to retire at some point. So, as Michael Johnson said, retire when you have done everything that you want to do, and I have done everything I want to do, so I'm going to retire.
Bolt's journey to becoming the world's fastest man begins away from the track, in the tiny village of Sherwood-Content. Out here, life moves at a different pace. And growing up, he was so energetic, his family took him to the doctors.
The doctor examined him, says, no, nothing is wrong with the child. He's perfect, he's fit. All the doctor says to him, just wait, you will see its outcome.
Usain Bolt is a world junior champion.
Bolt was breaking records long before he reached the Olympics. But most people first heard of him here in Beijing.
Usain Bolt streaking away from the field.
As he jump-started a career that would change his sport.
Bolt's going to do it again!
And change the way we watch it.
The triple-triple! He's done it!
Whoa.
He makes it look easy, but being the world's fastest man takes hard work.
You got to register time.
He says he won't miss this part of the job, so what's next?
I was like, coach, let's do long jump. He's like, no. That was it. He said, no. If you start doing long jump, you're going to have bad knees. No. So that was it. But I've always said I wanted to play football.
In the past, he's paid a visit to his favourite team, Manchester United, and soon he'll travel to Germany to spend a few days training with Borussia Dortmund. In the meantime, this is how Bolt unwinds. From laid-back pursuits to something with a bit more adrenaline. Things he'll have more time for now his Olympic career is over.
How does it feel to sit and watch after you know you've won, to watch that 200 meters or that 100 meter race? How do you feel? I don't know. So we'll see.
Next year's World Championships in London will be Bolt's last major competition. He says he'll miss athletics, perhaps not as much as athletics will miss him. Katie Gornall, BBC News.
The moon is closer to Earth tonight than it's been for nearly 70 years, making it appear bigger and brighter than usual. This was how it looked in New York early this morning, and the phenomenon, known as a supermoon, has been seen around the world. Because it's closer to the horizon, the full moon appears much lower in the sky, as you can see here in Beijing. Sadly, cloudy skies above much of the UK tonight means it is harder to spot, but there have been some sightings. Beautiful. Newsnight is coming up on BBC Two. Here's Evan Davis.
Tonight, which kind of Trump will the new president be? Hard Trump or soft Trump? We'll hear from Nigel Farage's right-hand man, who was there in the room with Donald Trump on Saturday. Join me now on BBC Two, 11 p.m. in Scotland.
Here on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Good night.